Hey guys, as you can see, I'm gonna talk about this movie with the only two stuffed dolls that resemble dogs, as you can see. Because, yep, I just went to see Call of the Wild, the latest film that is based on a literary novel called Call of the Wild. Yeah, kind of redundant. It's written by Jack London. And it's a book that I didn't read this, but I I was a little bit knowledgeable about the story, a little bit, because well, I think I already told you in some other places that I'm not exactly a dog person, and when it's about movies, I think that I kind of have a little bit of a distaste on dog movies. Somehow because I have the feeling that Hollywood glorifies dogs as much as Egyptians glorified cats. And sometimes even to the point that they're biased into it. So it is really, really rare for me to go see dog movies unless they make me some good kind of impression. Considering that it was either this or going to see The Boy 2, or it was Bram's The Boy 2, whatever, how they're gonna call it. But no, I decided to skip the horror movie mostly because I wasn't too keen on the first movie, even though the first movie had a great twist. But there is a big reason why I decided to watch this version of Call of the Wild. And that is none other than the director himself, Chris Sanders. Chris Sanders is one of my favorite animation directors there is. He basically actually directed two of my favorite movies of all time, I'll say. I mean, he directed my favorite Disney movie of all time in traditional art, which is none other than Lilo and Stitch. And also he directed my favorite DreamWorks movie, which is none other than How to Train Your Dragon. So how can I go wrong with this guy? And by the way, check out his artwork on other things. They're pretty good. So I had kind of like this big faith into this guy just because I felt like this guy, well, he's a flawed director, but he can't go wrong in many ways. And I think he's very underrated in my opinion. And the funny thing is that I never intended to watch Call of the Wild, at least for curiosity's sake, because there's one aspect that I'm going to talk to you later. But, so there. These are my reasons why I decided to watch Call of the Wild, and, well, I just came back from watching it. How was it? I'll tell you. Here's the thing. It's not a bad movie. No, it's really not. But this movie has problems. Problems that could mar this movie from being, well done. And there are parts that actually makes me worry about the future of filmmaking. This is technically the whole thing that how I can describe this film. First of all, one thing that worries me from the start of the movie is that that this movie technically marks the first time that instead of the usual logo of 20th Century Fox, we got 20th Century Studios. Considering that Fox is bought by Disney. Yeah, you know what, guys? I'm still, if I'm to blame also about the success of Disney, I'm gonna blame it on you guys. So don't come crying that I warn you guys that if you keep on buying your subscriptions to Disney Plus, Disney will eventually take over the world. What's next Disney's gonna buy? NASA? Next time Disney's gonna buy Congress. Next time Disney's gonna buy, I was gonna say China, but I think that they already bought it. Okay, that's a little bit of venting that I have. But let's talk about the movie itself. So, by the way, just in case, before I make this review, I I felt that it was a little bit necessary to have a little bit of a background information about the movie. I mean, about the book, because well, I know that I could be a big book. I don't know exactly how big the Call of the Wild book is or whatever it is. So I decided to read a little bit of a cliff note, at least on the Wikipedia. So consider this mostly a semi-analysis of what my thoughts about this film after making a little bit of research. So, what's the story about? Well, first of all, I'll say that it's an intriguing story. It's a story about this dog named Buck. He starts out like a spoiled dog in a distinguished family. He's domesticated, but very spoiled, very bratty, I'll say, until he was stolen, he was sold, and then he goes through, and the story follows his adventure from being sold to the Yukon, and during the time of the gold rush. There he's being treated badly. He's treated well. He gets related with a couple of humans and also dogs, where he had to go from a domesticated dog to fend for himself, and like the movie title says, and also the book title says, it's called Call of the Wild, in which little by little Buck begins to engross himself into nature and becomes stronger in order to survive the wild. Especially since he's been, you see him from being domesticated to a sled dog, and from sled dog to a dog with no master, then to he have to deal with good masters, bad masters, and of course one of the masters, which is of course Harrison Ford, which I'll get to that just in case. And well, of course, the movie eventually leads to Buck the dog becoming wild and living off with the wolf, like the title says, Call of the Wild. So yeah, that's basically, it is an intriguing story, I'll say, and it follows a dog in which, in itself, it is intriguing how it's kind of like these kind of stories in which it starts out with a spoiled brat, but then eventually it has to learn about the harshness of reality when a certain event happens. In this case, he's been stolen and taken away, and he has to deal, of course, in a time in which it's really, really harsh, in a really harsh environment. I mean, like I said, we're talking about the era of the gold rush, where many people are going to snowy terrains. They had to rely on sled dogs, but eventually that nature is harsh, and people will die, usually by illness, wild animals, etc., etc. But of course, in this one, they took it in the perspective of a dog. While this part is kind of intriguing, this is probably one of the few positive things I could say about the film, in which the pacing is kind of good. And there's more positive things that I want to tell you, but unfortunately, I also have to play a little bit of devil's advocate. Sorry, Chris. All right. Let's get out the elephant in the room, because ever since the trailer, I can notice the big thing that harms the movie 100%, and that is the animals itself, even our main character. The dog. Guys, let me tell you this. Ever since I saw the first trailer, there's only one thing I have to say. The dog effects are bad. Are so bad. Okay, not terrible bad, but my God, this, if you wanted to buy this film, you can't do it. Because this is because the first instant that you see the dog, and it happens during the whole movie, the first word that comes into my mind is, oh, it's fake. Yes, there's absolutely no animals in this movie. Every single animal is CGI. I gotta sarcastically congratulate Disney, because thanks to Disney, now we don't need animal actors, and which I understand they want to do it because that way they can film scenes in which you can do to animals, because they do have the right to not go through harsh action scenes, and yeah, that is. But this is why you can't rely on digital animation all the time. It's not exactly like, for example, in Sonic the Hedgehog, in which Sonic can bypass that excuse because he has a character design. He's a more cartoonish character design. But Buck and almost every single animal in this movie, they all you notice that they're cartoons. And it doesn't blend exactly very well for live action actors. And man, it's kind of distracting in a way, especially when there are areas in which you can notice how bad they're filmed. And by the way, just in case, all the dog actions are mocap. All these action scenes are one guy having this mocap and acting like a dog. And I noticed some parts in which you can tell that they wanted to make the dog move a very unnatural. They kind of like a cartoon. So, like for example, there are ways in which they moved their. There was a scene in which they have Buck walk on snow, and he kind of raises one of his hind legs really unnaturally. It's something that not even a normal dog can walk. Or the scene in which he tries to get up, take out a belt like this. It looks like a cartoon. And it's even more cartoonish considering that it is about, how can I say, animals having a little bit of human entropy or something like that. Or empathy, human empathy. In which, granted, a lot of novels, they do that, in which they kind of gave out anthropomorphification on animals, in which doesn't necessarily have to be physical. They also can be mentally. In which I can accept that. But again, boy, these animals are so fake. So fake that it's distracting. Oh man, and it is sad, because in a way, I could say that this is kind of like the opposite spectrum of Disney's Lion King from last year, in which they become a little bit too cartoonish to be blended out to live action. Okay, I'm dragging this thing on because this is the biggest nitpick that I have with this movie, in which I can get a little bit too mad, because despite anything, you can tell that Chris Sanders is a competent director. The cinematography is well done. Some of the shots are really beautiful. The action scenes are well shot. But again, all of these, unfortunately, are also sets. They're CGI, which it wouldn't be too bad. But again, depending on how you can tolerate uncanny valleyness, this movie wouldn't be too appreciative. In my case, yeah, it's very distracting. But in a way, I was so interested in the journey that I just got engrossed and kind of become forgiving a little bit sometimes. But every time when something new happens, fake, yep. Okay, now we have acting. There are a couple of actors in which they do a decent job, but the big marketing that this movie has is that the final master that takes care of the dog Buck is none other than, of course, Harrison Ford. Oh man, look, I know that Harrison Ford can be a good actor, and he is, but in my opinion, I think that Harrison Ford is the perfect example of beating a dead horse. I have the feeling that he is the grumpiest actor to date. Ah, man. But, no, I'm not complaining about Harrison Ford because he's doing well with the material that he has, even though he had to interact with a guy acting in a mocap suit, acting like a dog. And you know what? Now that I think about it, it's kind of hilariously weird. Is it me, or there was a scene in which he rubbed the dog's belly, or he kind of played around, you know, with a guy acting like a dog? They're kind of funny. It reminded me of there was an episode of a Mexican comedy called El Chavo del Ocho, and there's this episode in which one of the characters kind of orders another character to act out like a dog. Okay, that's the image that I have with Harrison Ford. But yeah, there's a few slew characters that goes into it, but one thing that happened is that the movie kind of felt like it needed a villain, in which this villain is technically not prominent in the book, but they make it a little bit more prominent in the movie. Sorry about the loud cars. And this guy is played by, Dan Stevens. Oh my god, this guy he pops out of, he gets into the movie with this twirly mustache that this guy should be hired to act into the most insane, crazy, two-dimensional, super evil, inhuman beings in the world that in a way is kind of hilarious, but if you put it in the right moment, he will be so he'll be, well, menacing, especially considering how they put his contacts. This guy, he appears in this really shiny red clothing that, for one thing, I thought that he was probably second cast to be Dr. Robotnik for Sonic the Hedgehog. That's the thing that, I mean, yeah, Jim Carrey was great at Dr. Robotnik, but I think this guy, he could have been the second place, because, I don't know, there was doing something hilarious out of it, and so stupidly evil about this guy. Considering that in the book, he doesn't survive the first time you see him, but then they decided to, we need a villain, so let's keep this guy and drag it out. And well, that's pretty much all I have to say about the human actors. Alright, what else there is? I like the soundtrack. The soundtrack is pretty good. Pacing about the movie is kind of like a 2-hour movie, so it's fine. The tone of the movie, this is something that I do also want to talk about it, because sometimes the movie tries to play out a little bit too sympathetic, or they try to watership down a little bit more of the most violent tones that the movie has. And yeah, they made it a little bit more family friendly and more accessible for younger audiences. I think there was a kid there in which he was excited to watch the movie. But there are times that the movie does get indeed a little bit dark, but not too dark. I think this is a little bit also courtesy of Chris Sanders, since he was an ex-animator from Disney. And so there's a little bit of this Disney magic attached to this guy somehow. So they don't want to go too cruel or too kiddie. So it's kind of like a balance. But here's the thing that rubs the wrong way. Call of the Wild, according to the investigation that I did, is not pretty. No, it's not a pretty book. Because Call of the Wild is a movie that has cruelty, it has lots of deaths, it's bloody, and it is harsh. So they kind of tone it down, and you know, in this movie, imagine the first few minutes, it kind of starts out like the Beethoven movie, and then it just gradually gets a little bit too serious, considering that it is also narrated by Harrison Ford. I already forgot to tell you that. But there were some moments in which they could get a little bit too intense, but somehow the movie says, halt, no, don't go too intense, go there. Like, for example, there is this rival dog in which Buck had to deal with, and also, so according to the book, they kill him off. They kill that dog. Buck killed the dog. I mean, but in the movie, no. Let's give him a one-shot death in which he gets humiliated and runs away until his death. Because we don't want to scare off the children. So yeah, the kind of like deaths are most of the time off screen, except for the final one. Although I do have to appreciate that most of the narrative of the movie, it is still faithful to the book. It's just that, here's the thing, guys. I'm exactly a guy who is pretty okay with tonal shifts, even in the same movie. Because sometimes you're happy-go-lucky, you're happy, and then someone will come and punch you in the face and your day is ruined. That's life. But what I think that this movie kind of fails, at least in my opinion, is that in order to make it a little bit too believable on the terms of movie going, you have to understand also that nature basically is not exactly pretty. We all have people, you know, saying that the beauty of nature, the beauty of how good this looks, how animal life is, and yeah, it's all pretty. Art usually technically shows us the most beautiful things about nature, but I think we come into a moment in which we don't have to underestimate nature, kind of like the sea too, in which it's beautiful by the outside, but when you go deeper, it's not exactly pretty. And the arc of Buck seems a little, it feels more like the typical movie experience that you see in these dog movies, although with a certain bit of harshness, I'll say. So I'll give that a little bit to Chris Sanders in one thing or another. But personally, I will push them. We should teach children that nature, when in the right hands or in the right mind, it can be beautiful. But the wild and also human nature, it's not exactly pretty. I have a little bit of also a nitpick that I have with this movie. It's usually a little bit of the portrayal of Buck. That ever since the start of the movie, somehow it kind of shows that Buck, I know that even in the book, he's a big dog. And so big that apparently this is the reason why they needed to find someone to play a dog and then make him animated. But here's the thing. Sometimes they make this dog a little bit too strong. so strong that there were like 2 or 3 instances that I was thinking, man, this dog may be from Krypton. Yeah, I thought that this dog was actually Crypto. That's how strong they made this dog. And, well, I think that, for what it's worth, Call of the Wild 2020. It's an okay film. I don't regret watching the movie because I still support Chris Sanders. Unfortunately, because of the fake CGI and a little bit of the neutering of the source material, it still kind of shows that there are still some problems during to make kind of like a movie very believable, and they're still really underestimating, younger audiences, in which they say that, well, younger audiences are gonna get scared, or they're gonna get, you know what? No, not this time. I was thinking of something a little bit political, but I don't want to go through there, at least for now. So there you go. I'm not gonna lie by saying that this movie, despite its flaws, it did win me over to be interested enough to call it a kind of like a good movie, at least. Good in its own ways. It is a good lesson for everyone to try to find some improvement on the craft of how to use CGI correctly. And this is not one of those movies that uses the CGI correctly. So what could have saved this movie, in my opinion? First of all, no live action actors. This movie was well off being animated. So this is why I said, Chris Sanders, you're a good director. You're a good director, but you know what? Stick with animation. I think you're better off with doing animation than live action. You want to try again? Be my guest, but no more, please, no more CGI animals. I mean, animals can get acting jobs too, don't they?